Morgan and I took care of the family farm in Benton County, Arkansas, where we grow soybeans and raise a few head of cattle. And all of this happened in October 2023 on a cold, moonless night. We grew up here. The fields have always been our routine, our refuge, and sometimes our prison. Life in the countryside means miles of dirt road and a silence so thick you can hear your own heartbeat. Our closest neighbors, George and Kenny, live about 500 meters away, one to the north and the other to the south, and we've all known each other since childhood. With so few people around, bonds become inevitable. George often brings us honey from his beehives, and whenever it rains hard, Kenny comes by to check if our fence held up. That night, after dinner, we were sitting on the porch drinking coffee when we heard a noise coming from the barn. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like someone was moving the tools. Morgan frowned. "It's probably a raccoon," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. We sat in silence for a minute. Then we heard it again, a long creak, followed by muffled footsteps in the straw. "I'll go take a look," I said, standing up. She grabbed my arm. "Don't go alone," I whispered. "It's just the barn. No one comes here uninvited." But something in her voice made me hesitate. Still, I grabbed the flashlight and went. As I approached, I saw that the side door, which we always lock, was slightly ajar. I stopped a few feet away and shouted, "Is anyone in there?" Silence. Then a low voice replied, "We just need a place to wait for sunrise." I asked, "Who are you?" The voice said, "My brother and I. Our car broke down on the road." I insisted, "Have your brother speak." Nothing. I waited. Then the same voice said, "He's sleeping." My stomach turned. That didn't sound right. I ran back to the house. "Someone's in the barn," I told Morgan. She went pale. "Call George." I dialed, but before he could answer, we heard voices, two of them now, whispering near the well, then muffled laughter. George answered on the third ring. "There are strangers here," I said quickly. "I'll be there in 2 minutes," he replied. I hung up. Morgan was already dialing 911. While she spoke to the dispatcher, we heard footsteps approaching the house. Someone tried to turn the doorknob on the back door. I shouted, "Stay back! We've already called the police!" A voice replied, "We just want water, please!" But it was the same voice as before, and now it sounded closer, almost pressed against the wall. I ran to the bedroom, grabbed the rifle from under the bed, and returned to the living room. Morgan was shaking on the phone. The footsteps circled the house until they reached the living room window. The curtains moved slightly. "Get out of here!" Morgan yelled. Silence. Then a soft knock on the window pane. That's when we heard the rumble of George's truck. Headlights swept across the yard. He got out, shotgun in hand, scanning every direction. "I didn't see anyone on the road," he said, out of breath. He came inside, locked the door, and stayed with us until the sheriff arrived, nearly an hour later. The officer searched the area but found nothing, not even footprints or marks. Even so, the following week, we installed motion sensor lights and a reinforced padlock on the barn. To this day, whenever the wind slams hard against that side door, a chill runs up my spine because I know that on that night, we weren't the only ones breathing in the dark. This story happened at my uncle's farm in October 2022. I was alone that night because they'd gone to a wedding in town. They paid me to take care of the chickens and the orchard for the 3 days they'd be away. On the last night, I was reading on the porch when I noticed a strange flash of light coming from the peach orchard. At first, I thought it was a car passing on the distant road, but then all the chickens started clucking at once. Normally, they make noise at dawn, but at midnight, out of nowhere? That only happens when something terrifies them. Since I was the only person on the property, I had to go see what it was. I went to the kitchen cabinet to grab a flashlight, but when I opened the door, I heard a sharp scream, like a man's scream. My heart nearly stopped. I ran to the back bedroom where my uncle kept his rifle. I grabbed the gun, loaded it, and went outside. The chickens were still shrieking, hysterical. I went to the coop, but at first glance, everything seemed intact, until I realized the rooster was missing. He always slept on the highest perch. Now he wasn't there. Then I heard a sound that seemed to be coming from the orchard. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. As I walked between the trees, I swore I saw shadowy figures moving between the trunks. I stopped, stayed silent. Then came whispers, as if someone were praying softly. I fired a shot into the sky. Everything stopped. The chickens fell silent. No sound from the orchard. Until I heard footsteps rustling through the dry leaves. I didn't want to go in there, but I couldn't run. It was my responsibility to protect that land. I moved deeper among the trees. The air grew colder. Then I saw it, a figure in white, standing beneath the old pear tree. I raised the rifle and shouted for it to identify itself. It didn't respond. I fired another shot into the air. The figure didn't move. On the contrary, it began walking toward me, arms outstretched, as if it wanted to embrace me. I aimed the gun straight at its chest and shouted again. That's when I realized it wasn't just one person. At least 5 figures, all dressed in white, emerged from the shadows between the trees, and maybe more beyond the reach of my flashlight. When the first one drew closer, I saw what made me lose my breath. They were all wearing masks made of bark, with hollow eyes and stitched shut mouths. It stopped when I stepped back. For a moment, the orchard fell into absolute silence. I'd never felt such pure fear. I was about to panic right then and there, and I was certain I wouldn't make it out alive. Then
They began to sing. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the melody was hypnotic, almost sweet, and I had the terrible feeling they were preparing me for something. On impulse, I turned and ran through the trees, tripping over roots. When I ran out of breath, I stopped and fired 3 shots into the darkness. I heard branches snapping, leaves flying. They were retreating, finally fleeing. I ran back to the house, but before I reached the porch, I saw something on the ground that made me drop to my knees. At the center of a circle of rotting fruit lay the rooster's body, its feathers plucked out, its eyes replaced with dried plums. I nearly passed out. I stumbled inside and vomited in the hallway. I called the police on the landline. I told them everything, trembling. The dispatcher said an officer would come right away. Then I called my parents. My dad promised he'd be there in under an hour. I locked myself in the bedroom, clutching the rifle, crying until I heard the siren. I ran outside. When I saw the officer, relief nearly knocked me over. I told him everything. He searched the orchard and found the rooster's body. He called for backup immediately. This became a crime scene. My parents arrived shortly after. We spoke with the officer, and they took me home that same night. Since then, my uncles have installed motion sensors and thermal cameras all over the property. Who were those people? Clearly, they weren't there by accident. And I was just the kid unlucky enough to be alone on the very night they chose the orchard for their little ritual.
My name is Tyler. I'm 26 years old and live on the rural property my grandparents left near Harrison. When my parents go to visit my aunt in Memphis, I'm put in charge of taking care of the place. It's just a small plot with a few horses and a little orchard. Nothing profitable, just our slice of rest and peace. My parents expect me to stay here when they retire. I'm the oldest son, and my younger brother, Eli, hates the countryside. My sister, Jules, already moved to Fayetteville. But I'm not so sure, especially after what happened in June last year. That week, my parents were away. Only me and my 2 cousins, Reed and Lila, were at the house. They'd come to help out while doing a remote internship. There's hardly anyone around here, just miles of dirt road and silence. Sometimes the silence is so dull, you feel like screaming just to hear an echo. Except that night, when everything happened. It all started around 11 p.m. Reed was in the kitchen making a snack. Lila and I were on the couch watching a documentary about hunting. None of us want to spend our lives here. Reed dreams of being a photographer in Chicago. Me? Maybe a teacher. The countryside definitely isn't our future. One of the biggest worries of rural life isn't the weather or the animals. It's loneliness. Because when something goes wrong, you're on your own. That's why we keep a rifle in the living room closet. That's when the horses started whinnying, all at once, frantic. Something had deeply frightened them. I ran to the stable. All 3 were rearing up, stomping their hooves on the ground. I shouted for them to calm down, and slowly, they obeyed. I stood at the edge of the pasture, listening. Then I heard it, a low whistle coming from the dirt road that cuts through the property. It was human. I had no doubt about that. It was the first time I dealt with an intruder without my parents around. I ran back, grabbed the rifle, and heard the horses start whinnying again. I warned my cousins. There's someone out there, near the fence. I'm going to scare him off. Reed and Lila thought it was absurd to go out into the dark after a whistler. In fact, they made me see the obvious. And when I realized it, a chill ran down my spine. It really was dangerous. So instead, I went to the gate. The horses were hysterical, staring towards the road. I aimed the rifle at the sky and fired a shot. The sound echoed across the hill and silenced the animals. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of control. And I shouted, "This is private property. Get off." I thought that would be enough. I went back inside. My cousins laughed, and I laughed with them. But the laughter died quickly, because the horses started whinnying again, louder than before. I went out again, ready to repeat the gesture, but I froze. There he was. A man standing by the fence, about 15 yards from the stable. He stared right at me. I yelled, "Hey!" He turned and ran down the road. I fired another shot into the air and ran to the gate. But I didn't follow him, didn't even consider it. And I wasn't about to leave the horses alone. I locked the gate and led the animals into the inner corral. I told my cousins someone had been watching the property. What did we do next? We called my dad. He said that in his absence, I was responsible and needed to protect the family. He suggested that if the guy came back, I should fire again, just to show I wasn't kidding. After that, we all turned in. Reed and Lila took flashlights to their rooms. I took the rifle to mine, just in case. We were all a little on edge. I left the window slightly open. While watching a video on my phone, I heard the whistle again, this time closer. I ran to the window. I saw a figure walking slowly down the orchard path. Then, as if sensing my eyes on him, he stopped, turned, and looked straight at me, still whistling. This guy was clearly taunting us. A stupid move, since I'd already made it clear I was armed. I grabbed the rifle, aimed out the window, and fired at the ground a few yards in front of him, deliberately missing. He vanished into the darkness before the echo of the shot faded. This time he didn't come back. Only a lunatic would. I told my cousins what had happened and said he won't show up again. We never found out who he was. It could have just been a group of teenagers from Boonville trying to scare some hicks. Or someone with worse intentions. To this day, we still don't know what that person really was.